Speaker, very smart guy in general, and I will let him speak.
Hi. So how is everybody doing? Yeah, I have screen recording. Okay, so this talk is titled React and RxJS. It's mostly, like, half of it is an opinionated rant about stuff I don't like. So that's a fair warning. So actually, this is like why I absolutely love Flux. Why Flux is such a great architecture and everyone should use it for everything. And Doron told me to be positive and like to be nice to everyone and not about like how terrible Flux is and why it makes me spit blood and stuff. So I'm Benjamin. I work at TipRanks. We are a really cool startup here. You can talk to me about it later. I assume it's like not interesting to 90% of you, so I'll move on. So I want to start with a very, very fundamental question. What's cool about React? What got all of us here talking about this library? And this is something that like comes back in React. It's pretty much the fact that the view is a pure function of the model. And this is a very, very nice idea conceptually. Instead of having to think about where everything is placed in a view layer is just a projection of everything we have in the model layer. We have our data, and we have our view, and we know that every single time we render the view from the data, we get the same thing. And this is really empowering. I don't know how many of you wrote with other older frameworks, like deprecated stuff like Angular that no one really anymore. I'm being serious. So if any of you got like the opportunity and great chance to write with Angular, you know how awesome having the model be a direct projection of the view is. Like I said, this is awesome. This is something that we all love about React, at least I hope. And it's not a very opinionated projection. Like, you can use React and you can wrap it any way you like, and it works. And this is a disclaimer, the next few slides are particularly snarky. I'm not usually a fan of snark, unless something really annoys me, which we'll see. It's super opinionated. If anyone has a problem, just deal with it. And I want to make sure it's taken in good humor, although, like, in all honesty, if it's not, deal with it. And we use Redux at TipRanks, so I'm obviously being like a hypocrite here. And Redux has some really, really cool ideas. I'm sure most of you, or some of you, watch like that stocks, and they're like, oh my god, this is so awesome, I can hot reload stuff, and a bunch of other things like time travel and all the great things that come with immutability, and this is cool. So, what about Flux? We said like React is awesome because the view is a direct projection of the model, and it's a very simple value proposition. It's literally something you can explain in a line and then teach React for like half a day, and the person knows React. There are like 6, 7 lifecycle hooks to learn, and there is the idea of JSX, which is not tightly coupled to React, but everyone, is there anyone here that does not use JSX in React? Anyone? Really?
JSX? No.
Yeah, okay. So it's fair to say like, that JSX is effectively like part of the way we write React, and it's really nice. It lets us express things nicely. But what about Flux? Like, if you watch the original React lectures, they're all like super simple and fun and make sense. But if you talk about Flux, it's all like all these super complicated box diagrams and how stuff connects to other stuff and architecture. And it's not very easy to explain. If I have to explain like MVC or MVVM or that sort of stuff, it's pretty easy to explain in like 2 or 3 slides. But Flux somehow, like, no one agrees. It's not like no one agrees what MVC is either. But Flux is like, it exists for like 2 years, and no one agrees, and like, there are no 2 people who have the exact same idea of what Flux means. And I think most of them suffer from the same problem. There are like different variants. We talked about Redux, that's not really Flux, but essentially it's what most people mean today when they say Flux. And I want to like bring a point of discussion. This is something that people like to bring up. Like, Flux is functional, Redux is functional. Like, it's all functional and fun and great. Who here, and I want like a raise of hands, thinks like Redux is a functional library or framework?
Sort of.
Sort of. Okay. Weird things like Flux is like a functional design pattern, or has anything to do with functional programming.
Not enough fluxes.
Cool. Okay. So like you keep using that word, but I don't think either Flux or Redux have much to do with functional programming. Like the core abstractions of functional programming, which people like to mention, like stuff like higher order functions and take calls and all that is not relevant. So what we're left with is, are we composing data or are we composing actions and then executing them on the data? And like, let's just look at an example, okay? Let's just look at something really simple. We all have to do. We have a component and we want to make like an AJAX call and fetch stuff and put it in the component and then render our state. Virtually, like everyone here probably did it at one point. And for this example, I have a books component and I want to load data from the server and display the component, which is trivial if I was using like jQuery, which Door here is a huge fan of. I just do like $.get and fetch data and then like render it into the DOM, maybe with like a DOM ID with like a selector or something, but it would be like 2 lines of coding to be super obvious and simple. So let's say I have a books component, so this is all like JSX and simple React. It has a render method. I could have made it like a functional component. I didn't. No particular good reason why. But it does this like a return thing. Oh, there's a good reason why. Sorry. So it returns a list, like an ordered list with list items of good like computer programming books, and I need to download the actual books from the server. So what do? I add a lifecycle hook, right? That looks something like this. Component will mount or component did mount, and then in there I trigger an action that says download books. So inside like this beautiful thing where I'm rendering stuff and it's like a pure function of the model and we're all like, yeah, that's super cool. I'm causing like a very explicit uncontrolled side effects of like download books. And I have like my action that looks like this. If you're using Redux with the promise middleware, you probably have like similar code. And I have the download books, it triggers, and it says like, this is a download books action, and I have promise because I'm using promise middleware. If you're doing something else, you have similar code, and then fetch the data, and then I turn it to JSON in like another completely other unrelated file that has no direct interaction with the books component, except the fact the books component like called it like through an out-controlled action. And then I have my reducer, which is a pure function, and my reducer uses my giant global God object that has access to everything, contains like everything in my application. And inside there I have a giant switch case, which is suddenly like cool and acceptable in a cool design pattern. And there I take my giant God object and I update it. So I take like my action.payload, which is not very clear, but I assume that since it's my download book success, like I don't want to call it a callback, like my special like thing in my giant switch case, I take the books and then I put them in my state. So basically I had, let's just look at it again. So basically all I want to do is render books from the server, right? So it sounds simple, but I had to use like a lifecycle hook. I can obviously put it in the decorator and like feel smart about myself, but I have a lifecycle hook that like triggers an uncontrolled side effect, and then in my uncontrolled side effect I cause like another uncontrolled side effect. It uses like a special magic thing in middleware that generates stuff for me, that like writes code for me, and then there I use the switch case and I put stuff in my giant like God object, and I display it, which like this part is like acceptable. I take it from the props with the selector, and then like, I map the box to the UL, and this stuff like in React I love because I'm writing JavaScript and it's very clear and nice and it's React. And that's a very good architecture, right? It's very Vue and simple and it's functional and we're all having fun and we're feeling clever about ourselves and like everything is like good architecture and oh my god, I'm so cool, I'm writing Flux and React. So you tell me, right, there's like smart components and non-components and never put like all the logic of component will mount, fetch stuff from the server. And I'm not a huge fan of that either because it's clearly like, maybe not clearly, but in my opinion, my humble opinion, it's a like very bad separation of concerns because suddenly, like instead of my view layer being cool and pure and being a projection of the model, now my view layer has like these tiny managers that control my view layer. They're like like controllers, sort of, and they're dictating like the state of my model. So instead of my model being like, instead of having like a hard time controlling my view, and now my view controls everything. My smart components trigger all the animatory side effects, and it does, to be completely fair, it does make things better. Having dumb components, like the point of smart and dumb components is that my dumb components are dumb, and it's good, because my dumb components are like the way I like to write React. My smart components are obviously like a very bad balance of concerns, and they're dictating the state of my model, and I want to blood. Okay, so this is like the Redux idea of functional. Everything is done on a global God object using uncontrolled side effects. Right? So this is like somehow decoupled and unopinionated, and it's good architecture, and decoupling is obviously free because I don't have to pay anything by having like 6 different parts of my code that communicate without me having any control over it, and firing global events, and suddenly global events are also a good idea. So this is what I have to say about like this being so decoupled and unopinionated. So who knows who this is?
Is it you?
No, it's not me. Okay, that was the question. This is like Simon, he wrote Haskell, never mind. Right, so people who write Flux and people who write Redux obviously like to say, it's all immutable, there are no side effects. I have my object, and my object is big and nice, and it's global, and it's super global, and everything has access to everywhere, which is good, but it's all immutable, so it's okay, because no one can change anything. So, first of all, if all your app is immutable, like, and just want to make sure it's clear for everyone. If all your app is immutable, nothing happens, right? Nothing can happen in a computer program if there's no state mutations. Like, computer programming is like the art of like composing side effects. This is like Eric Meyer, who was like.
Why didn't you ask?
This is Eric Meyer. You obviously all know who he is because he's like my god, and he said that like he has a nice quote that says like programming is tastefully composing side effects. He's one of the people who worked in Haskell, and he wrote Rx and Link. If some of you know C#, and he's like a very smart person. So obviously, like the entire proposition that like it's all immutable. It's obviously immutable. You just have a God object and you're mutating it. Just the fact that you change the reference is not enough. You still have like mutations in your code. Your code is like full of mutations. They're just on like a super global now. So it's good because it's not the. Like, the cool part about immutability is that the projection of your data that your view gets is like the library immutable.js enforces that you don't change the view. That's like the really cool thing about immutable and that sort of stuff. But it's definitely not that your code is immutable. Your code has just as much state as it had before you did Flux and before you did immutable.js. Immutable.js does not reduce the amount of state you had. What it helps you control. The idea is control the state once it travels to the view. Once it gets to the view, it doesn't change anymore. That's like the good thing, but it's definitely not functional or immutable or there are no side effects because, like we said, programming is tastefully composing side effects. So that's pretty much my snarky rant about Redux and Flux and what I don't like about mutating like giant God objects. So I wanted to show something a little different. So who here ever worked with Rx? Woo, that's. Yes, okay. So Rx, reactive extensions, was initially like a C# library. It was written by this dude, and it's becoming a standard. The ECMAScript, like the TC39, the committee is working on standardizing it. It's currently a stage 1 proposal. I expect it to progress to stage 2 very soon. A lot of interesting discussion. If any of you ever wants to contribute or come by, we'd really appreciate it. It's on the ES observable GitHub repository. Lots of discussions. We're always looking for input, so come by. And the point of Rx is to make complicated asynchronous flows easy. So the point is basically, there are a lot of ways to explain like Rx, but the point in a nutshell is that you take your regular event emitters, things that intercept events, and you add all the cool functions you know to them, like map, reduce, filter, and so on and so on. And also like this operator that says, wait for another event. And it turns out it makes them really empowering. There are much more elegant ways to look at Rx. It's like, the coolest one is you take like iterables, like normal iteration, you invert all the arrows and you get the same thing. But this is like, I think the most pragmatic way to look at Rx. So, basically, like promises are single values, observables are like functions. This is like probably the most confusing thing to people who are new to Rx. that a promise is like a value, and like in some observable libraries, like observables are values, but in Rx they're not. They're just functions. You compose them like functions. It's entirely functional, and only when you subscribe, the actions execute. So if you like have an observable that makes an HTTP request and you subscribe to it twice, unlike a promise, it will trigger 2 HTTP requests. Another thing people again get confused by is that the okay, so that's also the other thing that observables are unicast. If you subscribe to them twice, they'll trigger the action twice. They're like functions. They're not like values. And almost everything through time is like an observable. Like a mouse click is like it's a sequence of everything that happens to the page is like a sequence. Like if I have animation, the animation is like an event emitter, and if I have clicks, it's like an event emitter. And I want to do stuff to all these cool things I work with. Even variables are like observables of the current value. So just some basic stuff. How do I create observables? I just like take an event with a selector. I don't like the selector, but that's another tab. Or I create like subject, or I do like new observable, and I explicitly give it an event. This is like a trigger in jQuery, and subscribe is kind of like on. I can do cool things with them. Let's say I want to listen to all the key up events, and I want for each key up to take the value of the input and then ignore all the values that are empty. So this is like 3 lines of Rx that do all that. And it's pretty nice, and then I can just subscribe to it, and then console log, and it will log every time the user did something with the key up on that selector, and I'll have fun time. Right. So this example, autocomplete, everyone always gives it in talks about Rx. The reason is that it's a very complicated flow, and when you think about it, you need to like only send the requests. Only send requests when users stop typing, and you need to wait a little, and if the server returns like results out of sync, like you typed A and then you typed B, and it returned the results for A later, you displayed the wrong thing. It's a very nice example of how to confuse people. So autocomplete is a very confusing example, and I just want to illustrate how powerful Rx is in synchronizing like asynchronous events. So this is like I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines, fully working example of an autocomplete. I just look at all the events of my elements, I take their values, I only take the ones that are not empty, I wait a little because the user is still typing, then I don't want to send duplicate requests, and I want for each value to take a promise for the value over the my API, and then like take it with JSON, and that's like all of it. I can subscribe to O and look at all the what? Yeah, sorry, that's debout. Yeah, that's a good correction. Yeah, and if we want to look at it, I think I have an example somewhere. I don't know if it will work. Yeah, no, it's. Okay, so this is a demo of my observables. I have a key up observable. It's pretty much the same as the what I showed in the talk. So if I like take my key up, I get all these events, and none of them pass the filter because it's waiting for a boolean, and then I can type stuff and to pass the filter, and it will wait for 500 minutes. Like it's probably should be debounce. That's right. That's not correct. And then this is then throttled, and I wait for changes because if I just prove the errors, you don't want to send any request. So this will get throttled, but it will not pass this gate. And then this is just the search results with an Ajax. So I don't expect you to understand everything in the slide, but I just want to illustrate how simple it is to take something as complex as an autocomplete flow and just do it with Rx. I'll just skip that. I don't think that. How much time do I have left?
About 10 minutes.
Okay, that's okay. So Rx is popular, like Angular 2, which is not Angular 1, so it's not as horrible, has it integrated, because they thought it was a good idea. I did not. It's on an ES 2016 standards track, which means hopefully we'll have an observable type in the language. There are a lot of like ports, different languages. If you write Java, you have Rx Java. If you have write C#, it's Rx. If you have Scala, it's R. There's a bunch of like useful libraries in order to write Rx for all platforms, and it's really nice. It's fun. It's backed by Microsoft, because Eric worked for Microsoft when he wrote it initially, and now it's backed by Netflix. The guys who are working on ES Observable and the guys working, like the heaviest, loudest users of Rx are people from Netflix, like Ben Lash and Jafar Hussein and all these like really nice people. So here's the value proposition. I want to teach React to be reactive, actually, like, to actually be reactive. So I want to be able to bind my values to the results of observables. And what this lets me do, it lets me like write very nice code. I just inside my render, I do this.values, because this.values is my hack for like adding another thing to two components. That's where name is like an Rx observable, and I can just bind to it and things will automatically work. So this is basically what I want to do, and of course it has to do stuff like be fast, like I can put like 100 or 1,000 components here, and it needs to be able to nest, because I don't want it to only work on the parent component. So this, for example, a component with 100 children. And I wanted to be out with a decorator, because that's what I chose. It could be done through composition or through other methods. It just looked like the simplest way to do it. So, does everyone here know what decorator is? Who here has never seen decorator before? Don't be shy. Okay, so basically a decorator takes like a function or a class and it enhances it. It returns like a new function or a new class that wraps the original function and lets you attach more new behavior to it. It's a very cool pattern, it's a very scary pattern, it's also on the standards track, and we'll have this syntax native pretty soon. Obviously it works in Babel, it works in TypeScript and all the nice stuff. So I'm subclassing my React component, and basically this is my constructor. It's mostly about a part of boilerplate. I want to keep all my subscriptions. The reason this is important in Rx is because I want to dispose them when I'm done. I don't want to have any event handlers that are irrelevant. It's not that important if all we're doing is like binding to mouse clicks, because mouse clicks are not an expensive resource. But if we fetch stock data, which is the other thing that Rx people like to talk about, it's all autocomplete in stock data, is that I don't want to keep any connections open and that sort of stuff. So I want to be nice and clean up after myself. I want to have the values here, like everything Rx needs, so I can bind to that in my template. And I want to keep a cached value of the render. I'll soon show you why I did this. This is basically like a huge hack, where I trick React by returning the old tree if nothing in my code changed. And I want to do the actual binding. So how will it look? First, I want to have like an update method, and first it calls the component will unmount, because that's where I do my cleanup, like remove all the subscriptions and I want to add them again. And I want to create like an old, I put a program down this with the structure. So I pretty much creating my values, so I can bind to props. So if I have a prop that's not an observable, I can still bind to it. And then I want to define properties for the values. This is important. I want to define getters. The reason I want to define getters is that I don't want to create a subscription to an observable just cause. This is, again, because observables are unicast. This means that if I have a subscription and subscribing to, for example, an HTTP request, I can bind directly into. By the way, you saw the fetch middleware, which is cool. Here I can just fetch and like put it on my props, and it will magically work with an observable. So I can bind directly to HTTP responses and whatever I want. So I want to define properties because I don't want to create subscriptions. I want to take all the observables and to map them to like define property call, and then add them all to the object. So let's see how I do it. So basically it looks like this. If I already subscribed to an observable, I just want to reuse that subscription. I don't want to subscribe twice by mistake, because if I make an HTTP call and I'm binding to the value, I don't want to bind it twice. And then I do this like crazy stupid hack, where I subscribe to the observable with the value, and then I have this like hack that says you should now render, and then I update the value, and then I force update. The reason I force update is because I don't want to render the whole tree when things change. Usually in React we pass down props, and props are the actual values. Here I pass in observables. Observables are not actual values, they are values over time. So instead of using React's render, which is synchronous, like in lifecycle, I have my own thing here where I have a should render hook that I check if it's true, and if it's true I return the old value, I turn a new value, if it's not I return the new value. And if it errors, I throw an error. That's not a very interesting part. Who here has a general idea of what's going on? Oh, that's good. Yay! Okay, so when the component mounts, I update it, and I set a first update because the first update just creates the getters, and the second update actually calls the observables. And when component will receive props, I call update. But component will almost never receive props because I do all the rendering lifecycle myself. And so this only happens if this is only important if I have like nested components where some are using the decorator and some are not. When the component will mount, I do an unsubscribe. Ben Lesh commented that this should probably be like a composite subscriptions because subscriptions in RX5 are composite, so I could just add the subscriptions to one another, and cancel them at one go instead of having a for each loop. And I update the values to be empty and the subscriptions to be empty. And my render is super hacky and ugly. Basically, I do if this should render, which is only true when an observable emits a value. I call super.render, or I return old render. So I only update the value when the observable emits a change event and not when React decides to. So this is an important point because I have to call like force update here, which is a hack. I'm working around the fact that React is only always rendering synchronously, which is a nice property of it. And to be fair, I saw like a demo yesterday. Gil showed me here that did something cooler. That basically like returned subtrees and then Gil used compilantis to render on them. But this is a clever hack, and I just want to show a demo. Let's see. So this is like 100 counters. I could use more, but I just want to illustrate the fact that it's not slow. I can render like 100 things. It works with 1,000 just fine. And this is basically the code that I had before. Again, with the observed and my beautiful non-hacky code from before. And it's pretty cool because I get to teach React to be more reactive. So that's pretty cool. And let's see. Cool. So I want to discuss about, so this is basically the demo. All I want to illustrate here is the fact that it's not hard to teach React to bind to things that are not passed through props or state. It's easy to teach React new tricks. It's written in a very simple way, so I can bind it to asynchronous values pretty easily. I can do it no problem with promises or like one-time or things with value semantics. So that also works. And I want to talk for a few seconds about CycleJS. CycleJS is a library based on the fact that, based on these ideas, it uses a pattern called model view intent. It's pretty nice. It binds to Rx observables. Rx observables I use throughout. Andre, the author, is a contributor to Rx. It's a very nice, well thought out library. It's pretty good. It has some really ugly parts where you have to write query selectors to bind to events, which is like really ugly and hacky. I think it still has a way to come before it's considered like production ready. Obviously, some people are already putting it in production, but I don't think it's a very good idea. But it's definitely worth learning. So, some cool resources so you can ponder about. So this is like the project I found out yesterday. This slide will obviously be in the Meetup link. And there's a free CycleJS course, which I think you should all do because it's pretty short and fun. This is an Eric Meyer talk, which, like I said, is like my god. And he talks about observables and how to derive them. And Ben Lesh has an RxJS in-depth talk that goes into more of the less basic stuff. And before I'm done, I just want to thank reviewers who gave me all very honest criticism. Ben says that it looks fine. Eric Meyer said that this is not how you make friends. You are being very snarky here, and sent me a link to like the Dale Carnegie book about how to make friends and influence people. He thought it was like that rude, and this is the guy who like swears at all this stuff. Doron says like you can get away with anything with good humor, so that was good. And Gil said like I tried to teach my staff functional programming, but they almost lynched me. So that was so that was good. So and Ben, obviously Ben, who Dor agrees with, just said just use jQuery. Right, so I'll do the thanks first and then questions. So, thank you. And I'll backtrack. Yes.
Wonder, what do you think about another approach? There are like two approaches the way I see it. One is to teach React to be reactive, like more than just to render, like doing some hacks in order for it to receive observables. This is one approach that I see some people trying to do. The other approach, which I have to say that I'm more inclined to, is the approach of using React as it is because that's what you got. It receives simple logic, simple data, and doing all the complicated stuff on the observable side, which means taking the observable, do whatever you want, just emit the data, and let React just receive it.
So if I understand the question correctly, is whether or not this is a good idea. So I was kind of a cheater here because the first half was like how bad Flux and Redux is, and then I like gave you the how you can teach Rx to bind, but I didn't actually give you any solution. Who you saw that I didn't actually give any solution to anything, and just great, you get a beer. I'll buy you a beer afterwards. So basically, I wanted to show like a cool proof of concept. This is not a production ready thing. It's just like hack to see cool stuff. I would not use this in production. It's probably like possible to develop this into something that's production ready. This is not it. And about whether or not I'd rather wrap Rx in React or vice versa, I'd probably expect React to expose hooks that allow it to do it on its own. Yes, there was another question? Yes?
Do you have to bypass the event system in React view?
So this is like I only showed here really like one direction. I showed how to take stuff from the outside and put it on the inside. I don't have to bypass the event system. I can use it and then I can enhance it to take observables. I can. So I repeat the question. The question was whether or not I have to bypass the event system. I don't. And there is a lot of very interesting debate on like how do I create observables from the events. CycleJS uses query selectors, which I think is terrible.
Subjects.
Yeah, so another approach is like subjects. I can create observables that are both observable and like sources, and I can on-click call their next method and make stuff. More questions? Yes?
So you cannot think there's no good way to use RxJS and React in production?
So the question was, like, if there is a good way to use RxJS and React in production, or at least what I think about this complicated topic. So I think you should use RxJS in production with React Widow, where it simplifies stuff. I wouldn't like bind all my things to it, but for example, if you're using Redux, and you can like wait for like use the promise middleware, you can do the complicated stuff like autocomplete and more interesting asynchronous flows with Rx, and then just bind that to your existing like God global object framework of choice. Because I'm not sure I'd base it around Rx, but I definitely use Rx where it's appropriate.
Last question.
Last question. Anyone?
Why not create Rx smart components?
Why not create? Sorry.
RxJS smart components, like React Redux, smart component.
So the question was whether or not, like, why not create components that are Rx aware and components that are not Rx aware? I don't know. Like, maybe you can do it and it will work out fantastically. I read a lot of articles that try to do it, and I didn't like any of them. But it's definitely an interesting approach to consider. Sorry, I had one more and I'm still in the question. Yes?
Yeah, well, that's not actually related to this session, but you're always talking about the good almighty switch case class.
Yeah.
So, what about that? When will you see a good solution for that?
So the question is, when will we see a good solution to writing client architecture? The answer is never. Okay, that's all I got.
Do we make a break?